Namaste everyone, I am your co-host Shravani ma'am. Welcome to your favorite learning channel. The topic for today's video is history of classification. So in our previous video we had learned about classification, that it is a system of grouping different organisms based on their similarities and differences. Now have you ever thought of the need of classification? So why do we have to classify organisms? So this process of classification helps us to understand the diversity. So to understand the diversity of living organisms, then it also helps to identify all the living organisms. Okay, then this process of classification also helps us to understand the similarities and differences present among various groups. Thus among various groups of organisms we can understand. Then it also helps us to understand the process of evolution, that how the simple organisms have evolved into complex organisms. So now we will study that how there are different systems of classification existed. Okay, so first we will study about the two kingdom classification. So this two kingdom classification was proposed by the scientist named Carolus Linnaeus. Okay, Carolus Linnaeus. So the two kingdoms that he proposed were Plantae and Animalia. So the kingdom Plantae included all the prokaryotic and eukaryotic, photosynthetic and non-photosynthetic organisms, and Animalia included all the unicellular protozoa and multicellular metazoa. So this form of classification was based on how different organisms obtain their food, okay, and their ability to move. Based on these two factors, he divided all the living organisms into two kingdoms. Now, this system of classification had some limitations. So the limitations were that it did not distinguish, okay, it did not distinguish between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Also, it did not distinguish between the unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. Okay, then also there was no distinguished, he did not distinguish between photosynthetic and non-photosynthetic organisms Okay, so this was the main limitation. Even though this process of classification was easy to understand, but a large number of organisms did not fall into either of the category. A large number of organisms did not fall in either of the category. Okay, so because of this, another form of classification system was then proposed, and it was three kingdom classification. Okay, so this three kingdom classification was proposed by the scientist named Ernst Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel proposed the system of classification. So the three kingdoms were Plantae, Protista, and Animalia. So Plantae included all the eukaryotic autotrophs, Protista included eukaryotic heterotrophs as well as autotrophs, and Animalia included eukaryotic heterotrophic organisms. Okay, so this form of classification was based on morphology. Okay, or we can say it was based on morphological complexity. Okay, morphological complexity of organisms, tissue system, division of labor, and mode of nutrition. Okay, so but then this system of classification also had limitations. So the limitations were that there was no separation of prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Okay, then under Protista kingdom, both unicellular as well as multicellular organisms were classified. It included, okay, so this included unicellular and multicellular organisms. Both the types of organisms were included under Protista. So because of these limitations, this kingdom of classification also became inadequate, and then there was another system of classification called the four kingdom classification. Which was proposed by the scientist named Herbert F. Copeland. Okay, so he included a new kingdom called Monera. It also had Protista, like the earlier way of classification. Plantae was also there, and Animalia was also there. So one new kingdom he added was Monera. So Monera included all the prokaryotic organisms. Protista had primitive eukaryotic plants. Plantae had eukaryotic plants, and Animalia had eukaryotic animals. So again, this system of classification had some limitations, and the limitation was that fungi was not assigned a separate kingdom, was not assigned a separate kingdom. Okay. Then viruses were not classified. Okay. Viruses were not included in this method of classification. Then there was another scientist who proposed a 5-kingdom classification system which is widely accepted. So we will talk about the 5-kingdom classification. So this system of classification was proposed by the scientist R.H. Whittaker. Okay, he is an eminent scientist, and this method of classification is widely accepted now, and the 5 kingdoms that he proposed were Monera, Protista, fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. So here we can see that fungi has been assigned a separate kingdom. So the main criteria for classification, for this kind of classification, was, the criteria was cell. He included the cell structure. Okay, cell structure, body organization, mode of nutrition, then reproduction, and phylogenetic relationships. So based on these criteria, he had classified all the living organisms into 5 kingdoms. So even this form of classification has some limitations, that the viruses here, there is no different class or different kingdom that is assigned to viruses. So viruses are not included. Then unicellular algae are placed under Protista, whereas the multicellular ones are placed under Plantae. Then the kingdom Protista also includes organisms having different form. So kingdom Protista includes organisms, okay, which having different form, structure, okay, different form, structure and life cycle. So this is not a proper grouping, okay. So thus we can say there is no proper grouping. So these are some limitations of this form of classification. So now let's quickly revise the things that we have studied. We saw that classification is important because it helps us to understand the diversity in a better way. It helps in identification of living organisms based on their similarities and differences, it helps to understand the process of evolution. Okay, so then we talked about different systems of classification. First thing that we talked about was two kingdom classification that was given by Carolus Linnaeus. There were two kingdoms according to his system of classification that included Plantae and Animalia. So this system of classification was based on how different organisms obtained their food and their ability to move. So this system of classification had some limitations, that it did not distinguish between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, unicellular and multicellular organisms, as well as photosynthetic and non-photosynthetic organisms. So a large number of organisms did not fall in either of the category. So this system of classification became inadequate. Then the next system of classification that was proposed by Ernst Haeckel was three kingdom classification. According to him, there were three kingdoms, that is Plantae, Protista and Animalia. So here Protista was an additional kingdom. So this system of classification was based on the morphological complexity, tissue system, division of labor and mode of nutrition. Even this system of classification had limitations, like it did not separate prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Then under Protista, both unicellular as well as multicellular organisms were included. So then there was another system of classification that was proposed by Herbert F. Copeland, and it was four kingdom classification. According to him, there were four kingdoms, that is Monera, Protista, Plantae and Animalia. So he added one more kingdom, that is Monera. So this system of classification also lacked some things, like the fungi were not assigned a separate kingdom. Then the viruses were not included in the system of classification. Then the most widely accepted system of classification was given by R.H. Whitaker, that is the five kingdom classification. According to him, the five kingdoms were Monera, Protista, fungi, Plantae and Animalia. So the criteria for this classification were cell structure, body organization, mode of nutrition, reproduction and phylogenetic relationships. This system of classification also has some limitations, like in this system viruses are not included. Then the kingdom Protista includes organisms from having different form, structure and life cycle, thus it does not have a proper grouping. So I hope you all would have got some great insights by watching today's video. Please do not forget to like and share the video. Till then, thank you for watching.